Can I now call upon Professor K. Niranjan from University of Reading, but not before conveying to Professor Sharma about one of his biggest well-wishers from UK, Professor Mike Doherty. During one of the conversation, he keeps on coming to ICT every year. It's almost like a pilgrimage. He comes because it's Professor Sharma's institute. So one fine day he tells me, Thorat, I see, in each of the faculties little bit Sharma. I said, yes, I'm sure about it. He said, you all put together, and that's probably MMS. So that's the biggest, I think, compliment that Guru can receive. So Professor Niranjan from University of Reading.
Thank you very much. I'm probably the 15th or 16th speaker today, all talking about Professor Sharma. So there will be repetition, a lot of repetition in my talk. So those who feel I'm repeating, I apologize. But I was always told that, when good thoughts are repeated, they serve to reinforce the thoughts. So it is in that spirit that I'm going to give my presentation. I was also surprised that at least 5 or 6 speakers have referred to food systems and food projects. This is a problem with food engineering. I work in the area of food engineering. I edit the Journal of Food Engineering. But we have a serious problem. The chemical engineers who work in food engineering call it chemical engineering. The mechanical engineers call it mechanical engineering. Electrical engineers call it electrical engineering, and food engineering doesn't seem to have an identity of its own, and that is something that I'm trying my best to promote, enhance the visibility of the subject and try to give it an identity, and I'll talk about that shortly. But anyway, I'm delighted to stand before you. This is an audience of the great and the good, and I feel pretty small. But what I would like to do is to highlight how my own research and approach to education and life in general have been influenced by Professor Sharma. In particular, I'm going to focus on some of the sound bites that I have heard from him, and because they have really influenced me a lot. I joined UDCT in 1974-75 as a first-year chemical engineering student, and in those days we were not exposed to the chemical engineering faculty till the 3rd and the 4th year of the program. But in the first year, Professor Sharma would give a welcome talk, and it was usually a 1-hour talk, and I must admit, as a first-year chemical engineering student, I didn't understand much about what he said. The first thing that struck me was his excellent command over English language and his confidence. These are the two things which really impressed upon me. In fact, I heard the word bloke for the first time from Professor Sharma, and soon after the class, I remember rushing to the dictionary to find out what the word bloke meant. But then one sentence that stuck in my head was this one, and he said, chemical engineering is a highly science-based engineering. Again, I must admit that I didn't understand the profoundness of this statement, but it stuck in me and it grew in me over the years till I used the same sentence in a slightly different context of food engineering. It was only a couple of years ago where I published a paper on reconceptualizing food engineering, and that was published in the Transactions of the Institution of Chemical Engineers. So there I referred to the science base required for food engineering. That article was liked by the editor of the Chemical Engineer, Adam Duckett, and he said, would you mind writing a magazine version of that same article, which I did. He ran it as a cover story here, but then the article appeared under the title, Let Food Be Thy Medicine and Medicine Be Thy Food. This was just a statement that I had made somewhere, but then, this is what happens when you give a serious manuscript to a journalist. It completely assumes a life of its own, and it's it's basically the same article that I published in the Transactions. So now I've been teaching food engineering for almost about 25 years, over 25 years in fact, and you will see that everything has changed in that 25 years. The manufacturing environment has changed, the market has changed, the regulatory environment has changed, human resource and training has changed. And what I found was that the food businesses were actually not growing around process improvements, but they were actually growing around product development. So product development was actually the key to food engineering. It is the strategic business driver, but we were hardly doing any product development within the context of engineering and engineering programs. So I was facing the same conundrum. Is food engineering really a process engineering, or is it a product engineering? And I must admit that I've given considerable thought to this, especially after we used to have some pretty acrimonious meetings in the Institution of Chemical Engineers, where the hardcore people working in Foster Wheeler and other companies would say that they even wanted the IChemE to change its name and call itself Institute of Chemical Process Engineering. And we had to fight a rearguard action and to say that, the product is also just important. Remember, if you have a product and you don't have a process to make it, it's of no use. If you have a process which doesn't lead to a product, the process is redundant. So you're talking about two sides of the same coin. And so what I did was to say that, let's not look at it as process engineering or whether it is product engineering. What we are trying to do in the context of food is to realize food products. And how do we realize food products in quantity, we realize food products in quality, and we also realize food products in efficacy. And that is at the heart of engineering design. And therefore I came up with the term, forget process engineering or product engineering, it is actually product realization engineering. And when you're talking about engineering design in this context, what we are trying to do is to maximize the product efficacy and minimize its environmental legacy. That would be the approach that one should take. So that was actually if this is the approach, then let's go back to what Professor Sharma said, that it's a science-based engineering. Yes, so what we are now saying is, it is still a science-based engineering, but the science basis has to be broadened. In the context of food, we need to understand nutrition. Engineers don't know very little about nutrition. We're talking about food metabolism. We don't know what is metabolism. We've never heard of metabolism in engineering. What about the relationship between diet and disease? All these things form the science base of food engineering, but we don't really have the basis for it. So the real challenge is, if this is the new concept of food engineering, how do we then plan student entry requirements? How do we structure a curriculum around this? So I came up with what is called the food engineering edifice, where I said we are going to take a theme-based approach, and I defined 5 themes under which you could really structure a curriculum. Mind you, this is not a prescription, it is more a framework for structuring a curriculum. So we have 5 different themes. I'm not going to go into the details, it's all published in the transactions. But then you cannot launch the theme unless you have some enabling subjects, and therefore, we need some core enabling subjects to launch the theme. Again, the themes were also not being applied separately and independently, so we also needed, in addition, some knowledge synthesizing or integrating courses. So that was essentially all this stemmed from the first sentence that I had heard from Professor Sharma, that chemical engineering was a science-based engineering. The second, now there's a lot that has been said about idea-driven research. I think it's true that when Professor Sharma started, he was facing severe resource constraints, and therefore he obscured it by sort of highlighting the ideas. But mind you, I mean, it's not a choice that one makes. Even if you have resources, it doesn't mean you can get away without having ideas. Idea-driven research is a prerequisite for research, and that is something that we have to note. Secondly, Professor Sharma did not solve the problem. This is what Professor Joshi mentioned. He did not solve the problem because it could be solved, but because it needed to be solved. But mind you, that is the Cambridge chemical engineering tradition, and I'll come to that in a minute. There's one point which has really not been highlighted. Professor Sharma has always been a trendsetter, but he also knows when to move on from a subject. He never kept on working in one subject area and reduce it to stamp collection. Stamp collection is a term which I think Rutherford coined in the context of research. Of course, he was extremely snobbish, and he said that you only research in physics, other research is all stamp collection. But I think here. As an editor, I find papers sort of literally being stamp collections in areas like membranes, where if you have a membrane, you keep throwing something at a membrane, something happens, you publish a paper. If you look at supercritical fluid extraction, again, same. You have the setup, so make use of it, keep on throwing something at it. And the worst culprit, in my view, is actually ultrasounds. Because, yes, you throw something at ultrasound, something will happen, but it's not even a scalable technology. And that is the problem. So people are beating technologies to death and indulging in stamp collection when we really should not be doing that, and we should guard ourselves against it. Incidentally, this whole idea of need-driven research is not new. When Bert Stewart Lightfoot first appeared in the late 1950s, the reviews for Bert Stewart Lightfoot appeared in the 1960s. And there was criticism from both the Cambridges on either side of the Atlantic. Cambridge, Boston, Massachusetts, as well as Cambridge, United Kingdom. Thomas Sherwood said that the solved problems in Bert Stewart Lightfoot are essentially the problems which can be solved. They are not the problems which need to be solved. Even Professor Danckwerts, who is Professor Sharma's PhD supervisor, he also mentions about the avoidance of topics, and he mentions specifically boiling heat transfer. And that is simply because it does not fit within, or at least in those days, it did not fit within the transport phenomena approach. And so clearly, it's been a problem right through that we always solve a problem that we can solve, but we must be focusing on problems that need to be solved. This is the old, I'm saying the old chemical engineering department building. And my next soundbite relates to a conversation that I had with Professor Sharma at the entrance of this building, standing here. I think it was in 1987 or 1988. During spring, he visited the department. So we had meetings whole day, and then we were waiting here. In those days, we didn't have this enclosure, and you could see the Shell logo very clearly. And if I recall correctly, I was probably waiting for Pandit to join us. So it was Prof and I, we were standing at that entrance here. Mind you, in those days, Professor Sharma was still the head of the department. He was not the director at that point. And there were rumors. Youngsters may think that rumors and fake news only started after Facebook and tweeting and whatever. But yes, we had rumors even in those days. And the rumor was that Professor Sharma was going to become the chairman of UGC. So I asked Professor, I said, there are rumors that you're going to take up the chairmanship of UGC. He gave a real dismissive look and told me, I will take up that position only on the day I run out of ideas. And this sentence had a very, very profound impact on the way I thought. Mind you, Professor was not trying to undermine the chairmanship's position nor the incumbent of that position. That wasn't the point. The problem is all these things take us away from teaching and research. There are this is a very important message, at least a message from a small person like me for academics, especially those who are working in good universities. Never barter teaching and leadership for, teaching and research for leadership roles where you cannot really make a difference. It's a very important thing because right now in education there are so many leadership roles. You have the Dean of Teaching, Dean of Research, Dean of Resource, Dean of Diversity. Then you have the Assistant Dean, Associate Dean, Additional Dean, Joint Dean, God knows. There are all kinds of positions and people, academics are simply taking up these positions and at the expense of teaching and research. So please don't undermine teaching and research. That's our core activity. That's why we are here. The other problem, which is a bigger danger in my view, is that academics are chasing totally irrelevant measures of esteem. And this is happening all over the world. In the West, you have universities chasing, rankings. You have the quality world university rankings. Roughly about 20,000 universities are ranked, and every vice chancellor wants his or her university to be ranked within the top 200 so that they can say, I'm within the top 1% of the world. So they spend a lot of time, lot of energy, and academics are spending a lot of time just feeding information for these sorts of surveys, and I think that's a totally irrelevant measures of esteem. If you look at Far East, again there is a problem. In places like Thailand, I have found universities wanting to be ISO accredited. What for, I don't know. I'm not against quality assurance in teaching or quality assurance in research. We want quality assurance, but I think ISO accreditation is totally going over the top, and it's a complete waste of all the resources that we have. Even in India, India has a very lopsided view on measure of esteem. I was speaking to a colleague in Kharagpur who works for a very well-known institute and no prizes for guessing what that institute is. But he told me, he considers the number of visits he makes to Delhi as a measure of esteem. He said, in a month, I am in Delhi for 20 days. So he thinks that is a measure of esteem. I said 20 days away in Delhi means you're going away from your students, from your teaching, from your research. But he didn't see that at all. And this, in my view, is one of the biggest dangers facing academics. People are chasing totally irrelevant measures of esteem. Professor Sharma was, I think Basant referred to his Delhi visits, but he was extremely selective when it came to committee participation. Now, this is the problem. We always look at the achievement of an individual, and there are no two views on the fact that Professor Sharma is a superstar. But don't forget that he also cherished a set of values and assiduously followed a set of values which propelled him to superstardom. Please focus on the values rather than the end result. The values can be replicated. End results can never be replicated. There will not be another Professor Sharma. That's for sure. The last soundbite that I'm going to mention is something that he told me. To this, there is a context. Now, I'm a Matunga man. I was born in San. I grew up in Matunga, just up this road here near Aurora Cinema. From my kindergarten to my PhD to my very first job in this department, I've been, it's all within a 1 kilometer radius of my house. And in 1983, I got this offer to go to Cambridge. Initially, I thought, okay, well, I'll go for 2 years. I was at that stage, I was a lecturer in the chemical engineering department here. So I thought, okay, I'll go for 2 years and come back. But then there was a telegram which said, we need you for 5 years. Now that meant I had to resign my position, and I was extremely confused. I had no care in the world. I was a very contented man. I was not clamoring to go abroad or anything. But I felt my whole world had turned upside down. I thought the ground was being literally pulled from under my feet. So in a very confused state, I went to Professor Sharma's office, he saw through me and he said, "Niranjan, you can't be so timid in your life." And it was that sentence which I have carried all the time. Whenever I find myself at crossroads, I remember this sentence. It doesn't mean I have always taken the right decision. Don't get me wrong. I'm a highly flawed individual and I've got many decisions wrong. But then I'm also able to face the consequences of my decision when they go wrong if you are not timid. And therefore, for youngsters, I have just two messages. Do not let timidity drive decision-making process. And secondly, do not miss a good opportunity to move out of your comfort zone. And that is because it makes life more interesting, it makes life more challenging, and dare I say, it makes life more rewarding as well. So I think I have taken up my fair share of time. I thank Professor Joshi for giving me this opportunity. I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to have first-hand interactions with Professor Sharma, for which I can only be grateful to destiny and to the professor himself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Niranjan. Professor Sharma had an uncanny knack of choosing the talent, looking for the talent all his life. I think he's also a social engineer apart from being a chemical engineer. So thanks for all the speakers in this session. I'm sorry that we are late. I apologize for that. But we will soon quickly move to the lunch area, which is on the library quadrangle. Professor Joshi, you want to say something? Photograph. That will be. So I think all the tree members, right? All the tree members, Professor Sharma, to remain there near the quadrangle, the marble hall for a photograph, and then we'll move on to the library area for the lunch, library quadrangle. Thank you, one and all.